All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today we are talking about networking for preparedness as an extension of your financial readiness. So sit back, get ready, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at it. All right, well, welcome. Thanks again. And all the feedback on the financial preparedness stuff, I really appreciate it. You've been hitting up my my social media and a couple of comments directly to my website. Hop over to www.insidemycanoehead.ca if you're interested in the podcast, the background behind the podcast, the company that owns the podcast, and a whole bunch of other really cool details. It's all right there, as well as a little button you can press, generates an email to send me your commentary, good, bad, or indifferent. We love all of it here at Inside My Canoe Head. So this week we are finishing off the financial preparedness. And one key aspect that's often overlooked and not talked about in preparedness is the idea of networking. Now, a lot of the research that I do in my professional world and part of the lecturing that I do in the academic world that I work in on a part-time basis is on the idea of social capital. And social capital is one of those capitals that exist in the world, right? We understand what financial capital is, that's the money. We understand what human capital is, that's the education. We understand what physical capital is, that's the goods that are available, the widgets, etc. When we talk about social capital, it's a much more, in some minds, wishy-washy idea. But in the most simplest terms, social capital is the potential resources that exist in the human networks we create. So, for example, I may not have the things that I need. Any one of those capitals reside within my social capital network. So if you think about a mesh diagram, right, and you connect yourself to everybody you know, right, and then everybody you know is connected inside their own web of relationships. Now, if you just imagine that for a second, that 3D model of webs of people, that's the social networking that exists within a community. Now, when we talk about a community, it's not just geographically delineated. It can also be spatially and temporally limited. So the idea being is that, for example, I may be a member of a faith community, and that faith community is not geographically limited because it exists in wide stretches of places. So inside that faith community, I have a number of important relationships. And those relationships are based on norms of reciprocity, which means I'm going to help you, you're likely to help me. And then norms of trust, and trust means I'm basically going to treat you like a good person, and what I say, I mean what I say, and it builds relationships. And over time, the strength of those relationships will wax and they'll wane. And this is why it is temporally limited as well, because you can have a set of great relationships, but sometimes they expire. Sometimes they need to expire, and sometimes they just go away. The relationship kind of softens and you don't talk a lot to the person. But when you consider all of the relationships you have with people, with strong, trusted relationships, it means you have access to their resources, their capital. So not just their financial capital, but their human capital. If you have a relationship with somebody with a really high level of education in a certain niche, you, by freedom of having that relationship, can ask them a bunch of questions and can access that body of knowledge through your social relationships. Now, expand this out in the idea of preparedness, right? We know that the two top variables that indicate a community is more than likely to have greater post-event outcomes. The two variables that tell us that are the frequency and distribution of social infrastructure. Now, social infrastructure is every single place where people collide, intentionally or otherwise. So it could be meeting centers, community centers, parks, rec centers, barbershops, nail salons, places where community members will gather for one purpose or another, intentionally or otherwise collide. A coffee shop, anything like that within the community. The frequency, which means the amount, and the distribution, how it's laid out within a community, actually is a really strong indicator for the level of preparedness in that community, because the number one thing is the strength of the relationships in the community, the sense of place. And we measure that in a bit of a it's difficult to say what's the strength of the relationships within this community. What's the strength of the community, right? It's hard to codify that. And a lot of people that measure things in science want to be able to put a number on it. So this community's connectivity is an 8.7 out of 10 relative to the standard deviation, blah, blah, blah. Like that means nothing to anybody, right? You can't put a number on social capital. You can't put a number on the strength of the community. It's a cultural, it's a feeling, it's a sense of belonging, a sense of place. Do you belong in your neighborhood, etc.? And that sense of belonging and that strength of the relationships, that is directly correlated to better post-event outcomes, right? It's not the people that have a lot of supplies in their basement. It's not the people that are preppers. If you want to look at the community level, not at the individual level, but at the community level, a community that does best in an emergency is a community that's well connected. It has a sense of belonging. It has a sense of identity and a sense of place, right? Like when people say, I'm from a certain part of a city, I don't say I'm from, say, New York. No, you're from the Bronx, right? Or you're from Harlem, or you're from the Lower East Side, or you're from some neighborhood that you identify with, but not the big city. Sure, you're a New Yorker, everybody's a New Yorker, but the idea being is you identify with a place that you see as home. That sense of identity is incredibly important. And so in the networking we talk about, from the professional sense, networking has always been about establishing positive relationships with other people to build your access to resources. So in effect, networking is the functional application of the intentional building of your social capital, right? So I'm using this subject matter this morning because I spent an hour and a half, close to 2 hours this morning at a coffee shop with a group of veterans as part of a new organization that I joined here in Canada called Treble Victor. And basically it's an organization who, as I understand it, trust me, I've been in this a month. As I understand it, Treble Victor's idea is that they're there to provide a space and a gathering point where veterans transitioning to a business or an entrepreneurial environment have a place to mentor, network, talk about issues, and have a sense of belonging. Because a big key thing, if you're a veteran, you'll understand that the one thing we miss the most about the military when we leave, it's the sense of identity, it's the sense of belonging, it's the sense of who we are and our purpose in life. It's a bit of a shock for veterans when you step outside of that world into the big bad world where, nobody stays in their lanes, nobody does what they're supposed to. Everybody, it looks like an unorganized freaking free-for-all out there. And so the idea of Treble Victor is that, as I understand it, is they're creating this space where veterans can come together who are transitioning to competitive roles within industry, or they're trying an entrepreneurial, or they just want to be around other veterans, right? Let's be a sense. This is something that I have been actively searching for since I retired 4 years ago, is a place that where the veterans gather, other than the Legion, because that has a totally different vibe. I'm talking about people who are getting after it, right? People who are up and function and looking at the world. Now, we all carry some burden, physical and mental health injuries in the military. When you're a veteran, those go with you, right? But when you're in a room full of people who have physical and mental health challenges as a result of serving their country, but they're also within that context still going after it, still going to try to build a second career, a new identity of who I am and my sense of place in this world, I'm building my social capital. That's what I was doing this morning. Meeting new people, ingratiating, talking about common issues, helping people out, sharing what I could share. It was the first shot at building what I hope to be a longer-term relationship with this organization where I can hopefully at some point contribute and help a veteran who is at some point in their transition looking for advice in an area or about to navigate, let's say, an obstacle that I've navigated. And that makes, to me, a world of sense and a valuable organization. So multiple feedback will come on this in the months to come as to whether it's a good idea. But I think it fits very well in the world of preparedness because I've always said that the number one resource you have for preparedness is your community. It's the human beings around you. I've often been quoted as saying, if you do one thing for preparedness and nothing else, it's go meet your neighbor. Go say hi to your neighbor, shake your neighbor's hand, get to know your neighbor. That will make you far more prepared than anything you could buy at a store. And that often gets a bunch of pushback from people who frame preparedness as a measurement in stockpiles, kit, and equipment that goes in your basement, right? That's what I refer to as perceived preparedness. You're relying on kit and equipment to get you through. I'm trying to reorientate the discussion and the ideas that we have to your success in preparedness, your success in being able to navigate exogenous shocks that happen to you beyond your control are measured in the strength of your relationships, not in the volume of equipment. That's the totally different avenue that we go down here at Inside My Canoe Head. Now, there is a time and place for discussions on kit and equipment. One of our 10 weeks of preparedness coming up, we're zeroing in on that because depending on how you define your family and your shelter in place plan, there very well may be a hole in your preparedness gap that you've identified that needs to be filled by a piece of acquired equipment. That very likely will happen, but that only occurs after you've written a preparedness plan. Attempting to buy a piece of equipment or a top 10 to stock up on before you create the family preparedness plan is arse backwards, as we call it on the East Coast, right? It's putting the cart before the horse. I'm buying a bunch of stuff because a bunch of people are telling me I need to stock up on these 10 items, but I have yet to figure out what it is my family and I are going to intend to do when the shizzy hits the fizzy, the world goes pear-shaped. What are we going to do? So the pushback on all of that is go out and build your networking. Go out and meet common individuals in your community. Because remember, if you were to have a major incident in your neighborhood, say the Bronx or Harlem, right? Or here in Ottawa, Canada, where I live, there's the ratio to first responders to residents on active duty, maybe somewhere between 5,000 or 5,500 to 1. Are you that one human that's going to get that one first responder when the balloon goes up? The likelihood of that is no. We know from the research that's been done, the vast majority of people pulled out of buildings are pulled out by residents, not first responders. The vast majority of people that are saved from fire are saved by neighbors and friends, not first responders. This is not taken away from the first responders, but the data clearly tells us that your neighborhood is your first responders. They are the ones who are going to be there when it first happens. They're going to be the ones that reach out. They're going to be the ones bringing food to you. They're going to be the ones helping you out when the world's giving you a gut punch, right? So building that strong sense of community, in fact, is more important than going to the store and buying one of those buckets of add water food that'll make you sick and give you all kinds of constipation issue. But the point is that building strength in relationships is free. Networking is free. And I'll give you an idea. So I wanted to work about 10 years ago. I made the decision to transition a little over 10 years ago. I made the decision to transition from supply chain management career to an emergency preparedness career. So I've been at this a little over a decade. What I did then is I know what I want to be. I know the field that I want to work in, but how do I do that? So I sat back and said, okay, let's identify the top 7 or 8 human beings in this field, right? I need to get myself in the room with them. How does a guy like me do that? Well, it's very simple in the electronic world. I jumped on LinkedIn. I created a profile. I created an interest. I joined a couple of groups of which I showed interest. I jumped into the groups and I made some posts. I made some really intelligent, thoughtful posts that were not ideologically driven, that were not bellicose rants on something, and I put them out there. And then over time, I've built relationships with a significant number of people. So I've built social capital. We used to call it when I was younger street cred, right? I've built social capital, which means I have positive, strong relationships based upon norms of reciprocity and trust with a number of high-priced individuals within the emergency preparedness field. What that means is that I now have access to their resources. I have access to their capital, their human capital, their social capital, their physical capital. I can access their financial capital if I want to, if I need that. So all of that exists in that all of that exists in that network that you build. So networking for preparedness is not a new concept. Obviously, we build relationships anyhow, but I wanted to take the time today to focus in on the idea that networking is incredibly important. Now, where this can go off the rails, right, is when people think that lone wolf is the way to go. People think that I'm going to build a prepared household. I'm going to lock it down. I'm going to lock it down like that HBO or Netflix series where Buddy had the bunker in the basement of the house, and then he built all these fences and stuff around when the zombie apocalypse happened. The point being is you go lone wolf, humans don't survive that way. We're a gregarious species. We need a tribe. It's just who we are. It's how nature designed us, and there's no getting around it. So what you also see happening in the preparedness community is you'll see prepper groups. So you'll see groups of like-minded people who have taken preparedness to another step in the continuum. If you follow us here at Inside My Canoe Head, we've laid out a five-level continuum for identity within the preparedness space, from the blissfully unaware to the survivalist. And the prepper is the individual. Like, we aim to bring people to the middle ground, which is the third level, which is called the prepared individual. The individual who is educated and capable of navigating the majority of exogenous shocks that will happen to them, will be able to shelter in place for up to 14 days and be able to wait for critical infrastructure to be restored around them, and then society gets up and runs. Preppers are individuals who have the ability of one or more sectors of critical infrastructure to be able to do that in the medium to long term. So they're able to replicate their version of a power generation for medium to long term. Food generation, water generation, healthcare generation, whatever it may be, take your sectors of critical infrastructure, and the severity or the strength is a bad word, because you can have a whole bunch of stuff and be a fool and be over in 30 minutes. But from the prepper community, you start to see people who are more embraced and embedded in the prepper as you start to see them building out the critical infrastructure. So that's how we define preppers here at Inside My Canoe Head and at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. But point being, you have a group of people who define themselves as preppers in the way they define a prepper, and they get together. So they get a like-minded group connected through some form of social media, and they form groups. They may get together, but they basically live as the gray person within a society. Nobody around them knows that they're preppers, except for the other preppers that nobody knows are in their society, right? So they keep one level below eyesight, as I like to refer to it, one level below eye line. And what they do is they work with each other, they help each other out, and it's a sense of community, because even somebody who defines themselves as a prepper understands that they are more than likely going to be unsuccessful if they attempt to do this as a lone wolf prepper, right? Preppers will be far more successful when they're in a group of preppers. Now, sometimes that goes to the extreme where people have these camps where they pre-position equipment and all the families are going to fall back on it. A lot of that is Hollywood-ish. That requires societal collapse, and I don't know of any indicators or logic that tells me that that's actually possible. But whatever, some people live their lives. I mean, you're free to live the life the way you want to, and they take it to a little bit of an extreme. But the point being is even people who look at prepping from the perspective of really significant long-term investments, they understand that success is gained and supported and maintained through relationships that are based on trust and norms of reciprocity, right? And so with that enables prepping to be successful. So if the preppers do it, Maybe you should. The idea being is you do it anyhow, right? If you think about the faith community, if you think about your community organization, your local gardening club, your yoga club that you're in, your jiu-jitsu club all these clubs and organizations that you are a member of increases your social capital. As you build friendships in those things, you start to have more and more people on your LinkedIn, more and more people in your friend network, more and more people on your Facebook feed, whatever it may be. And you start to see you have this bigger and bigger pool of individuals from who you can draw information, who you can draw resources, kit and equipment if necessary, and even financial capital to start businesses are available through that kind of relationship. So the idea behind networking for preparedness is just that, is that you have to look at what do I want to know? What pieces of information do I want to have access to? What skill sets do I want to be aware of that I don't currently have? It's almost like identifying who you need to add to your network to fill any gaps or holes you have in your network, and then going to seek and find people out. So whether you are a veteran like myself looking for a group of common-minded individuals in something like Trouble Victor, or you're an individual who is just looking to build your social connectivity, I strongly encourage, from the lens of preparedness, for you to have a strong sense of place, a sense of belonging, and a sense of responsibility to others. This gets your arse up and moving. It gives you an identity that is not tied to your profession or tied to your role that you fill in society, but in a sense and a place of belonging. This is a key to preparedness, simply because there are never going to be enough government first responders or government programs of any type to deal with significant exogenous shocks. Communities are there. They've always have been. Communities have been responding to disasters and emergencies for time immemorial, and they've done it long before this thing in emergency management was invented, and they'll do it long after, right? So with that, I want to thank you for joining us this week at Inside My Canoe Head. I want to thank you for your continued support of our 10 weeks of practical preparedness as we close out this week, week 3, on financial preparedness, and we get ready to launch into week 4, which will kick off on Monday morning's podcast related to that subject. So thanks once more. If you have comments, please send it our way. And if you really enjoy the ideas that we have here at Inside My Canoe Head, feel free to throw me a coffee. I am fueled by simple, great black coffee. There's a Buy Me a Coffee link on our website that you can click on there and donate a cup of coffee. No subscription required. I don't want your email. I don't get a whole bunch of information. This isn't about building an email list. If you're interested in getting a weekly email newsletter about emergency preparedness, we produce that at our parent company at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. The link is on our website at www.insidemycanoehead.ca. You link over to the corporate site. On the corporate site, you scroll down a bit. There is a subscribe button there, and we send out a weekly newsletter on emergency preparedness free of charge, and it'll always be, and so will the podcast, right? This is our opportunity to give back to the community, to serve the people of the community, to provide people with evidence-based, research-based, non-apocalyptic preparedness information, right? Because remember, this week was all about the simple fact that you getting fired from your job and your family losing your primary source of income is just as impactful as your house burning down, right? As a wildfire. But nobody in preparedness talks about getting fired. That's why we're different, because we talk about preparedness for what it is. It's a whole of life. It's a lifestyle. It's an attitude. Nothing to do with your stockpile in your basement. So thanks for joining us this week in Inside My Canoe Head. You take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.